Hello everyone. We are continuing with our pilgrimage, walking in the footsteps of Jesus. We're up to class 17, which is like 8 months of classes. I actually thought we'd be done in 3 or 4, but that was months. But that was exceedingly naive. I hope you're enjoying it though. It's been a really wonderful experience for me to walk through the life of Christ yet one more time, enhanced by the experiences of actually being in Israel, in the place where all of this happened. Now that our COVID epidemic seems to be waning to some extent, we are now in July of 2021. The prospect of being actually able to go back to Israel in person is now raising the possibility. Future pilgrimages may well happen in person again, but I'm not quite yet sure exactly how we're going to make that happen, but stay tuned. So, let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us with clarity, with courage, with the deep understanding of the secrets of happiness, the way to avoid suffering, the pathway into the light. Show us day by day, hour by hour, how you would want us to live, that we may rise to the infinite freedom, which is our true destiny. Om. Peace. Amen. I wanted to start this evening by us listening to Swami Kriyananda singing this song, Emerald Isle. Inasmuch as we are in the last stages of the crucifixion of Christ, you might think this is an odd choice. But the more deeply one tunes into the consciousness Jesus brought to this experience, the more you can feel within him this extraordinary beauty and freedom. And this song of Swamiji's is an invitation to rise above all limitation and go into the heart of the beauty and the freedom, which is the truth of God's reality within us. So let us now listen to Swami sing.
Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, like the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May. My song is the story of deer on the hills, of larks that soar seeking the sun, of nightingales lifting the curtain of night, as with music they bring down heaven's blessing of light. Oh, my song is the story of God's blessing of light. Come join me in singing of that emerald isle, of flowers that like jewels besprinkle the lea of waterfalls eager to embrace the wide sea, as we with our Maker united would be, as we with our Maker reunited would be. Come here while I sing you of emerald hills, of valleys and meadows so fair, that all who have seen them have carried away memories in their hearts, friends, of the lilacs of May. Oh, my song is the story of the lilacs of May.
Ah, that's so lovely. I have to say that the realization of how that song might actually fit into the life of Christ. I'm going to give a shameless plug for someone else's classes, which is Keshava, has been doing these classes, these half-hour broadcasts on Friday mornings at 9 o'clock in California, and they're available online somewhere. And he's been going song by song of Swamiji's song, and he presented that song as in a different way than I'd ever considered it, which is it's a state of consciousness, a state of great freedom in your heart. And when I was trying to think about the consciousness of Jesus, they suddenly matched, even though it seems like a very unusual thing to think they would match. So here we are, and I highly encourage you to listen to Keshava's programs about the various songs. They've all been just fascinating. So, having said that, let's go back to where we are. We have been walking through what are known as the Stations of the Cross, which are 14 different demarcation points, starting with when Jesus was condemned, and then he had to walk from Pilate's, from the place of condemnation, carrying his cross to the hill that was called Golgotha, which is where he was crucified. And so we've been walking along that very route, which is something physically you can do when you're in Jerusalem. When Jesus was living, the place where he was condemned, where Pontius Pilate had his palace or his seat of judgment, whatever it was either outside the walls or at the edge of town, and where you were crucified was in the hills. It was on the road, but it was in the hills, not in the town. Now, the town of Jerusalem completely surrounds that area, so when you take this walk, as you have seen and will see, when you look at these locations, they're right within the city, they're right within the bazaar, actually. When I have personally walked that with reverence, we've gotten up very early in the morning so that all the shops are still closed, so you don't have that conflicting energy. But when Jesus was walking, he was just walking through the hills to this Mount of Calvary, this Golgotha outside of town. And so that's what we're working with here. And we are now up to the 8th station of the cross. Many of these stations are not mentioned in the Gospels, but where they are, I'm reading from the Bible. So this station number 8 commemorates the women of Jerusalem, and this is how the Bible describes it. This is the book of Luke. A large number of people followed Jesus, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nurse. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Now, there's many interpretations of this. The tragedy that came to the Jewish people 70 years after Jesus' death, when the whole of Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and all of the people were dispersed around the world, sent away from their homeland, not to return again until the middle of the 20th century, when they returned to that land. Or the inevitable sadness and disappointment that comes to us in life. Jesus says, don't weep for me, because he was surrendered to God, wholly in the consciousness of God, and therefore nothing could touch him. But you need to rise to where I am at this point. Now, also, I think of it from a different perspective, because it says elsewhere in the Bible that there were a group of women who followed Jesus in all his travels and took care of him. And many times in the New Testament you see with Mary Magdalene and with the Virgin Mary herself, with these women of Jerusalem, that Jesus did not discriminate in his ministry. It was a ministry for both men and women, and that it is said that the women had positions of great leadership, especially in the Essene community. And as I said many sessions ago, the Essene community there was the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. And the Essenes were the ones who kept the Sanatan Dharma element. They were the remnant from a higher age of what you would have to call the highest teachings of Judaism. They were not a corrupt priesthood. They were not lost in materialism. And the esoteric tradition is that the ministry of Jesus was to the Essene people and supported by the Essene people. And in the Essene community, men and women were equally valued, equal positions of leadership, because in higher ages, this is how mankind conducts itself. And the Essenes held on to a higher tradition. So they were also following Jesus with great courage and great devotion to him. So he must also, Luke doesn't report it, but he must also have responded to that deep devotion. He could not have left them only with the scolding, only with the prophecy of great suffering. He must also have responded to the love and the devotion that they were offering to him. And he would have wanted to leave them, not with a sense of how they were failing to live up to what Jesus wanted from them. He must also have commended them for their loyalty and for their courage in being willing to follow him, and for their many years of care and comfort to him, that they supported his mission in so many ways. So I don't accept what's written in the Bible is not consistent with how a guru would treat his disciples, especially in the last encounter that he would have with them. So there must also have been an element of joy, and he would certainly leave them encouraged and filled with hope, rather than merely anxious and afraid. So sometimes the stories that people choose to remember, even those who chronicle, and Luke was not his was not a first-hand experience. He received it also from others. And what people choose to see is not always that's there. So I love to think about being one of those women of Jerusalem and having Jesus at this moment of great intensity, yet stopping to speak to us. Stopping to spend a moment, our last moment as it were, just remembering all the joys that we had together and all the joys that were to come. What a grim prognosis this is. I've never trusted this verse in the Bible, quite frankly. And maybe that's presumptuous of me. But I understand Jesus from my experience of Swami and from Swami's experience of Master. And especially at such a moment, Jesus would want to leave his disciples with power. Power, he would want to give them power rather than taking that power away. So when I think of these women, I see it differently. And the Station of the Cross that is number 9, that comes after that, Jesus stops to speak to the women of Jerusalem, and then he falls for the 3rd time. So now, why don't we look at some of the pictures associated with these two moments in these last hours of Christ's life. Where we are right now, and you remember, you can see that sort of slightly standing out round shield up on the wall. This is the commemorative spot where it said that Jesus met with the women of Jerusalem. All of these are long-standing traditions that we follow now and feel now. Master said almost every place in Jerusalem is an authentic spot. So let's take the next picture. This is just a close-up in some a stone carving that there was a monastery or something also erected right on this spot. So this is the spot where Jesus stood with the women of Jerusalem. So let's go to the next. This is simply a close-up of that carved stone. What you have to think about, which I love thinking about, is Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. And right from the beginning, there were many who revered his life. And then over centuries, as the power of his teaching began to increase, thousands upon thousands, millions of people, over 20 centuries, just expressed their devotion over and over and over again, in whatever way seemed most appropriate to them. So when we stand in a spot like this, we're putting our hearts and our spirits, into, starting with the power that Jesus himself put here, and then amplified and amplified and amplified by centuries of devotees, just like us. So let's now look at a picture. This is one of the, this is actually from the Church of the Beatitudes. This is a picture of Jesus with his cross, meeting these women. Now remember, earlier was when he met his mother. So even though they have a woman in blue here who may be representing the Virgin Mary to us, we're really talking about all the other devotees, the group of women who were devoted to Jesus. Let's take the next picture. Another artist's rendition of the women meeting Jesus. And the guard following him with the sword. You see the whole picture. This must have been, such an interplay of worldly and spiritual power. And I suspect right up to the end, Jesus' disciples were always asking the question, will he submit or will he show his power and even now escape from this fate? Let's look at the next picture. Once again, an artist's picture of him meeting the women. One woman's carrying a baby with her children. They each have a different posture. One is covering her face and weeping. Others are reaching out to him, and the crowds are all there, and in the background, the Roman soldier watching the whole drama. Look at the posture of Jesus in this one. He looks like a dancer. You see him reaching out with his hand to bless the women. What power must have come off of that hand and off of those eyes in that moment. Let's take the next picture. This is in sculpture. Once again. Is the man on the left with the club, is he abusing Jesus or is he praying to him? Women with their children, because of the verse in Luke about the end of the world and women mourning for their children. Once again, you have that upraised hand of Jesus where his palm is outward, which is a gesture. There's many pictures of Master with his palms raised like that, chanting Om, in Master's case, chanting Om, projecting his divine energy into others. So you see that even in that moment, Jesus reaching out to bless. So then let's go now to the next station of the cross, which is the place where Jesus fell for the third time. And just, you have to go, sort of slightly down these alleyways. You see now, of course, you see the crosses and the churches, which have all been built there. But at the time that Jesus was walking, he was a lone voice, surrounded by those who loved him, but standing against the power, not standing in it as the church became later. We'll go closer to where the actual spot is. This is again where Jesus fell. Just right on that pavement by that wall. And then let's look at an artist's rendition of Jesus falling for the third time. And what you see is the guard has a rope around him to pull him up again. Imagine those who are following him, watching the one they love so deeply and being unable to help him. So while this plays, we're going to listen to Swami chant, Master's chant, no birth, no death. Because you have to always remember in this that Jesus was not his body. And even though his body was being put through this experience, his spirit was watching it just as the people on the street were watching it.
No birth, no death, no cast have I. No birth, no death, no cast have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am he, I am he. Blissful spirit, I am he. I am he, I am he, blessed spirit, I am he. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling, mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth nor metals am I, sky nor earth nor metals am I. I am he, I am he, blessed spirit, I am he. I am he, I am he, blessed spirit, I am he. No birth, no death, no cast have I. No birth, no death, no cast have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am he, I am he, blessed spirit, I am he. I am he, I am he, blessed spirit, I am he. I am he, I am he. Blessed Spirit, I am he, I am he, I am he. Blessed Spirit, I am here. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. Sky nor earth nor metals am I. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here. I am here, I am here. Blessed Spirit, I am here.
There's so much, especially when they do the Stations of the Cross. As I mentioned when we started this, there's a tremendous emphasis on how much Jesus suffered. And it is a very powerful and helpful image. But in the Festival of Light, it says, whereas in the past, suffering and sorrow were the coin of man's redemption, for us now that payment has been exchanged for calm acceptance and joy. Thus may we understand that pain is the fruit of self-love, whereas joy is the fruit of love for God. Now, of course, when we see karma expressed as vividly as it's expressed in the life of Christ, we become a little afraid, or almost everyone becomes a little afraid, because we don't know if we have the power to transcend. So it's a helpful exercise to relive this story, but from the point of view of outward suffering matched by inner bliss. I remember a very moving story I told, and this, of course, I heard, which is, of course, very challenging. But it was a man who was in a prisoner of war camp, and he was being brutally mistreated. And he was pushed to the point where he surrendered to God in a way he'd never been able to surrender before. And in that moment, he stopped feeling pain. He just felt bliss. And after that, he was never mistreated again. I have a friend who had to go through a very, very difficult cancer treatment. And eventually, the treatment prolonged his life, but only for a time. But he came to visit and said quite simply, so he said, he's a very strong person with a lot of will. He said the cancer treatment pushed him to a point where his will was useless. And he described that he had to surrender to God in a way that he didn't know was possible. And everything in his life was different from that point forward. And I'd known him a long time, and he was completely different. And from that point on, it was, he never for a moment resented what happened. He felt that everything that had happened was so clearly to bring him to such a much greater point of attunement with God, that whatever price he'd had to pay, it was nothing by comparison to the fruit. I mean, this is a very challenging teaching, and the life of Jesus, especially this part of it, is, now of course, we all know it ends in resurrection, but at this moment, we don't. So we have to also understand what Jesus was going through. In the life of Sri Ramakrishna, he developed throat cancer. And it's a very difficult, painful disease to have. And one of his disciples came to visit him in the last weeks or months of Ramakrishna's life. Ramakrishna had a very unpredictable lila. And lila is the right word. Lila means the play of God. So Ramakrishna was very unpredictable. And sometimes he behaved very much like a child. He had a very childlike manner. And he was sleeping, lying on what really became his deathbed. And his disciple was sitting next to him, and Ramakrishna started describing to the disciple the ravages of the disease and talking about the pain that it created and how he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, he could barely swallow. And he just kept in very vivid detail talking about what was happening with his body. The disciple who loves his guru with every cell of his being, the more Ramakrishna talks about his suffering, the more joyful the disciple begins to feel. And then the more explicit and exaggerated Ramakrishna's story is, the more uplifted the disciple feels. And finally the disciple looks at Ramakrishna and he just says, "You can't fool me anymore." And Ramakrishna begins to laugh, because that's what he was playing with his disciple. He was saying, "You may look at me and think I'm suffering, but if you only knew my consciousness." And so Ramakrishna exaggerated the disciples' expectations, just drove them farther and farther until the disciple from intuition could truly feel what Jesus was feeling. It's not that the body wasn't suffering, but the body is only one part of the reality that the Guru was experiencing. And in the case of Ramakrishna, of course, and absolutely in the case of Jesus, Jesus was using his body to work out the karma of his disciples so that those disciples could be elevated spiritually and become much more free. After Jesus died, just as he promised, he sent the Comforter. And the Comforter is the Om vibration. It's the Holy Spirit. And this is how Master explained it. And then the day of Pentecost, which was shortly after Jesus died on the cross, the disciples were lifted up in the Spirit. The Holy Spirit came to them, the Comforter. And Jesus had said to them, "I've taken you as far as I can take you." He said this before the crucifixion at the Last Supper. "But after I'm gone, I will send you the Comforter, and he will teach you that which I am not able to teach you now." Now, why wasn't Jesus able to teach them? He had a full state of realization, but the disciples weren't yet able to receive. So the way Master explains this is that Jesus took a great deal of the karma of his disciples onto himself through the crucifixion. Master allowed his body to become quite ill. Master took on a great deal of pain. He couldn't walk sometimes because of the pain in his knees. And he described to his disciples that there were dark astral entities, causing pain to his knees. And Master was doing that because he was, by the power of a master, he was taking the karma that his disciples would have had to live through and working it out on his body. Swami Kriyananda also did that for Ananda, for us as individuals. Now, if the Master, of his own free will, by his own free choice, out of pure love for his disciples, takes the pain upon himself, is he really suffering? Parents will go to heroic lengths for the sake of their children out of love. and never for a moment feel any regret or complaint about it. It's because I love you, this is what I would do. Many a parent has prayed to God to give the suffering of the child to me. Only occasionally is that, only rarely is that prayer granted. But Jesus knew he could do this. If I take the suffering on my physical body, my disciples will not have to experience it, and their spiritual evolution will be greatly accelerated. I mean, not only was he willing to do that, he was eager to do it. So was he really suffering? You see, it's very interesting, isn't it? There's a whole psychotherapy system that was developed by the man who was in a concentration camp. Oddly enough, his name escapes me, but it'll come back to me in a moment. And he called it the search for meaning, Viktor Frankl. He called it the search for meaning. And he said that people can endure anything if they have a transcendent reason for doing it. And he came to that after living through Auschwitz and terrible experiences. He was a young man in his early 20s when he was imprisoned as a Jew, because he was a Jew. And he lived 4 or 5 years in a concentration camp. He was already a certified psychiatrist, so he had a context. And he watched if individuals in the camp had a reason to survive, it gave them power to survive. And when they lost hope, lost the meaning of survival, the purpose of survival, he said they often died very quickly. And he turned that, when he was liberated and had a long career, into how to help people deal with the experiences of life. And the most moving story he tells in that book is there was a man who had a long and very happy marriage, was deeply devoted to his wife. They had been a wonderful couple together. She died, and he fell into such a depression that his friends feared for his sanity. And so they arranged for this man to come to see Dr. Frankl, as a psychiatrist. So the man sits across from Dr. Frankl, and Viktor Frankl talks to him. Tell me about your wife. So the man, of course, loved talking about his wife, how kind she was, how refined, how wonderful, all the marvelous experiences we had together, and so on like that. And so then Victor gradually leads the conversation. He said, did your wife depend on you to take care of you? Oh yes, it was my joy to take care of our lives together. I did so much for her. He said, well, if you had died first, how would it have been for your wife? Oh, he said, she would have been so lonely and in so many ways just lost without me there to take care of her. Then Dr. Frankl looked at him and said, just think, he said, you've spared your wife all that suffering. And the man went silent. And then he stood up, and without saying a word, he held Dr. Frankl's hand, and he walked out of his office, and he never had a need to come back. Because there was meaning in what he was doing. And even more than that, there was selfless service through the power of love. So if us, and all of us, can hear that story and understand it. And so what is the limit of selfless service through the power of love? Well, the story of Christ. The story of all masters, Master himself, when he was debilitated and couldn't walk, and the monks were carrying him up and down stairs, he said to the men who were carrying him, you're so kind with all your attentions to me. And they said, sir, it is you who are carrying the burden of our lives, of our karma. You are helping us. And then Master smiled so sweetly and said, God is helping God. That is his Leela. That is his beautiful plan. God helping God. So that's how we feel the story of Jesus, even through this, made even more sanctified and exquisite, and not cause for weeping and wailing, but for silent, extraordinary awe at the magnitude that the human being inspired by God, the magnitude of greatness and selfless giving that is our own true destiny. So now, station number 10 is when Jesus has his clothes taken away from him, and station number 11 is when he's nailed on the cross. So before we look at some pictures and talk about this, I'll read, there's one little verse from the Bible. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let us not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. That by casting dice, just gambling for it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. So this is what the soldiers did. So now let's look at the pictures related to these next 2 stations of the cross. At this point in the progress of Jesus, we come to this piazza and to this building, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The Holy Sepulchre, the sepulchre is the cave in which Jesus was placed after he was taken down from the cross. This is where we are now, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, where Jesus is the end of his physical life. This is in the middle of Jerusalem. I have traveled all over the world and been to many, now that sounds bigger than I am. I have been to many holy places in India, in the United States, in Europe, but this has to be one of the most sacred places on this planet. I have always been so concerned about the political chaos of this region of the world. It's been hard for me to imagine how this is going to endure. But that was before I went to Israel. After my first visit to Israel, going to this place and others that we have seen in this series, it's hard for me to imagine how God will not preserve these places, because there is so much holiness here. So I have no practical answer. I believe that Jesus came, if you look on the left of the picture, that's a stairwell coming down. I believe that's where you come when you're walking the stations of the cross. You would come to here, the yellow brick buildings, on the right side of the picture was the hill where Jesus was crucified. The place where you see the grates and the curtain is said to be the spot where Jesus' clothes were removed from him. And on that level, if you could walk straight in from that room, you're standing at what would have been the top of the hill. So if you were coming in at the time of Jesus, this would just be, there would be a roadway nearby, but this would just be fields and hills. And Jesus would have walked right up, not up a stairwell, but right up a barren hill, right to that spot. So let's look at another, the next picture. We're just looking at another angle. You see the grill work and you see the stairs. The big opening right in the center is the central door, and as we go through this section, I'll explain it more. Okay, let's go to the next. And this is a painting from the series that we've been showing, where Jesus was stripped of his clothes. Most of the pictures, he still has a garment over his lower body there. But it's more likely that he had his clothes taken away from him. To be naked is also extraordinarily humiliating, and the intention was to humiliate him as much as possible. Let's look at another picture here. Let's see. Right. So after his clothes were removed from him, the 11th station of the cross is when he was nailed to the cross. Horrible, unthinkable. And you see the women to the side who were following him all the way. Let's now go, we're going to go inside. Oh, let's see. Yes, this is Fra Angelico's picture of Jesus being nailed to the cross. It's more gentle, but nonetheless you see it, and you see the two Marys, Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary, standing and watching. Let's go to the next painting. This painting is actually just to the right. If we'd come from that area where the grill and the curtains were and walked into the church. In the next series, not right now, I'll sort of show you how we get to this point. If you are in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, we're standing in the church right now. We're looking at this painting of Jesus with his mother, with Mary Magdalene, standing there. And while we look at this picture, the song that I wanted to play for this one is the song Peace. And I thought of that because Jesus has now done exactly what he was born to do. He found his disciples, and of course, let's go back all the way to India. Everything he did there, he carried out exactly what God intended for him to do. And now it's done. Now he goes through a few hours, finishes the last things, but all free will and all choice are gone from him now. And so in a very real sense, the song Peace is not inappropriate for the spirit of what Christ was feeling. So let's listen to that song with this image in front of us as we stand in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We're standing right where Jesus was crucified.
Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby. Peace gave us the morning, peace gave us the sun, bird songs that call us to welcome day and fresh labors begun. Peace gave us the seasons, peace gave us the rain, cool clouds that gather to bless us, mist hands that soothe away pain. Amen. Amen. Peace give us our heart's love. Peace give us our smiles. Rays of thy presence within us. Light that all strife reconciles. Amen.
So now, Jesus has been nailed to the cross, and now we're going to go to the Old Testament, to the New Testament, I mean, because of course there's a great deal about this. So we'll read through what the Gospels have to say about Jesus being crucified. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Now, I remind you that the gospel I read is a compilation, so there's some repetition. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. They know not what they do, is how it's put more poetically. What I always read that is, of course, this was a very bad thing that these men did. But Jesus knew that they were carrying out a duty that had been assigned to them. They had not willfully chosen to do this. So I always took that as that Jesus was taking the karma on himself. Father, forgive them. What that means, if we think in terms of self-realization in the way we understand it, Father, God, forgive them means let the karma not accrue to them. So Jesus intercedes, I feel, even for those who are crucifying him. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. I think it was meant to be a soporific. The wine would dull the pain, but he did not take it. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many who read the sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." So, like right to the end, the priests wanted it understood, that he was a blasphemer and that they were not recognizing him, but he was blasphemous. But Pilate became the instrument of another proclamation. Those who passed by hurled insults at Jesus, shaking their heads and saying, You who brag that you are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. Now, other accounts of this say that the priests who were threatened by Jesus had created a drunken mob, and they sent them there to mock him even then, so that it wasn't a spontaneous outpouring of outrage from the populace, but rather it was a carefully calculated plot by the priests who wanted to get rid of this one. Jesus had made the statement, destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. And what he meant was the temple of the body, because after 3 days he was resurrected. And that's what the esoteric interpretation of that meant. But it was thrown back at Jesus as an accusation. This temple that took so many years to build, you'll knock the building down and reconstruct it? If you have that kind of power, then walk away from the cross now and save your body. In other words, they were mocking him. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him, saying, he saved others, but he can't save himself. If he's a king, let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God, then let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. It wasn't enough that he should die, but they wanted to in every way impress upon the minds of everyone that the claims this man had made were entirely false, because they knew what a threat he presented to their power. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, if you are the king, then save yourself. So it was a horrible scene, in other words. And there's just a few disciples, a few standing close, many at a distance, who are still, now just put yourself there. Just watching this. This one who gives the blind sight, raises the dead, is now nailed to a cross, completely helpless seemingly. What is the end of this story? One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at Jesus. Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and save us. But the other criminal rebuked him. Don't you fear God, he said. Since you are under the same sentence, we are justly punished, for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. Then he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered, truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Now we have this extraordinary story of 2 criminals on either side of Jesus sharing his fate, and one of them rails against the fate, and the other accepts it as divine justice and feels the power of Christ and turns to him for salvation. One refuses, even in this moment of absolute need, he refuses to turn to the divine. The other is drawn straight to Christ, and he's executed for his bad deeds, but he's blessed by dying when Jesus dies. And oh, the fate of the 2 of them. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother, his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene, 3 Marys. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved, which is John, this is from the book of John, and John never mentions his own name, the disciple whom Jesus loved, standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. There are some versions of this that say that Mary said, my son, seeing Jesus hanging on the cross. And so Jesus said, "Woman, behold your son." Now, Mary herself was a divine being. And however this took place, one of the other ways that this is told is simply that Jesus was finishing the business that he had. And so he had taken care of his mother, and now he wouldn't be there. So he gave that responsibility to John, and John took it for the rest of his life. For the rest of Mary's life, John took responsibility for her. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Now, Elijah was Jesus' guru. He was calling to God, he was calling to his guru. The explanation for why he would feel the darkness, one feel forsaken. I have heard it said, Rajasi spoke of this, that just before final freedom, there's a moment when you feel utterly bereft. Was Jesus having that experience? Was it necessary for him to call to his guru so that we would understand the power of that bond? Was it necessary to affirm again that this Jesus was also the disciple of Elijah, and confirm that Elijah, the imprint of Elijah was on Jesus as the Messiah? Many mysteries that certainly I can't fathom. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." And he called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Quite remarkable, isn't it? It is finished. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. Now, there is a tradition also that Jesus made a movement with his head, which is the same movement that is involved in one of the higher Kriya initiations, which is a technique that one uses to exit the body. So this is an esoteric tradition. But however it is seen, Jesus showed that the experience was not being done to him, but that he was in control of the experience. It is finished. Into thy hands, Father, I commit my spirit. And he exited his body. Which is to say, at any moment he could have done that. Just as Master died finishing the poem he was saying about his dedication to India, and he predicted that he would die speaking of my India and my America, which is exactly what Master did. He stopped his heart, he fell to the floor. Jesus, his death was more traumatic and dramatic, but it was chosen. So once more we ask, what was the consciousness of Jesus when he was going through this? At that moment, when Jesus gave his spirit over to God, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. It's the curtain where the Torah was kept, or the Holy of Holies. At that moment, the curtain ripped in two, the earth shook, the rocks split, and tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. This is skipping to the morning of Jesus' resurrection, that many great saints were visible to human eyes at that time. But the tradition here is that there was a huge earthquake, that the death of Jesus caused the very earth to tremble. When the centurion and those who were with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Some women were watching from a distance. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph. In Galilee, these women had followed Jesus and cared for his deeds. These are the women who were following him through the pathway to crucifixion. Many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem were also there. When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. Some were frightened and ran away, and some had the courage merely to stay close and watch. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and the next day was a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. This is a very gruesome detail of crucifixion. That apparently what you die from when you're crucified is that you gradually suffocate because you're hanging in such a way that your lungs get crushed over time. But if your legs are still strong enough to support you, the death is slower. So when they wanted to break the legs, it would hasten the suffocation, it would hasten the death, so they would die and could be taken off the crosses before the Sabbath arrived at sundown. This was the depths of Kali Yuga. And crucifixion, you have to understand, was the normal, which was the way people were executed, the usual way people were executed. That's why there were two criminals in Jesus. When somebody was to be executed, this horrible Kali Yuga way was the way it was done. Jesus was just an ordinary criminal. That's why it was done for him this way. So they wanted the legs to be broken so that death would be hastened, so the bodies could be taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other as well. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, because you see, not enough time had passed for him actually to have died, but he had left his body by his own choice. They found that he was already dead. They did not break his legs because there was no need to. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies, this is John speaking, so that you also may believe, because John was there at the crucifixion. So he's writing what he knows happened, meaning, above all, that Jesus committed his spirit to the Father and left his body. So John wants you to know, I was there, I saw it. And because of John's advanced spiritual state, he no doubt was perceiving not only with human eyes, but also with the Spirit. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced. So, that is the dramatic crucifixion and death of Jesus as explained in the Gospel. Now let's look at some pictures that relate to this, which is considered to be the 12th station of the cross. Jesus dies on the cross. Okay, now where we are now is when I was telling you where they removed Jesus' clothes and we were standing in front of that painting, which was inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now we're on the ground level and we have walked into this church. If you go back and look at the courtyard, when we first came in, the doorway was a little sort of in the center of the picture. So just to the right, looking at these stairwells, is the doorway. We're just right inside the door of this church. And when you come in on the ground level, we would have been standing at the base of the hill where Jesus was crucified. So this staircase, it's 15 feet up. It's a very steep staircase. It's very old. It's very worn. And so you go up this landing, goes very steeply to the left, and then you come out right where we were. Let's show the next picture. And you see the painting on the right, which is where we were standing, where the clothes were removed and Jesus was nailed to the cross. And then just to the left of that, where you see the silver designs and the second archway, is the spot where the cross was standing. And we'll go a little closer to that. Okay, now we've stepped, actually we're going the opposite way. We're stepping back. This is what would have been the top of the hill of Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, open air at the time. We've come up the stairs and we've turned to the right. We see the painting, the same painting we've been looking at. This square archway, this tabletop that we're looking at, is where the cross was set. And you'll see in a moment, as pilgrims, what you do is you actually crawl under that little table. They always do it like this. You crawl under the little table, and there is a hole in the floor which goes directly to the rock. And in the rock, there was a hollow that was wide enough for the cross itself to be dropped down, and the cross could remain upright because it would drop into the hole. So you can crawl under the table and then you can put your hand and you can touch the rock where the cross was placed. And of course, normally there's lots of people and they're all taking their turn to do that. So now let's show the next picture. Okay, this is the beginning. You can begin to see the decoration. Now, of course, we've had 20 centuries to create art and to decorate. So what you have is Jesus on the cross, and you have the two Marys on either side of him. And in the glass cases, we'll get closer, is the rock upon which all this was placed. Let's take the next picture. So this is, of course, just closer to the two Marys and Jesus hanging. Let's go closer again just to look at it. This is all, as you might well expect, highly decorated by this point. And we can go one step closer to just see. It's actually rather a beautiful piece of art. It's harder to see when you're there in person because there's so much going on. There's so much going on in this church. You have to spend many days looking at everything. So let's go again. And this is just another view of where you can crawl under the table and be close to where the cross was placed. Let's go to the next picture. This is one of my favorite places for some reason. Now you can see someone is under the table and you can see the decorative. This, I like to sit right next to that stone on both sides. We can go to the other stone on the left. You can just kneel next to the glass case. You're allowed, as long as the crowds are not too great, to just go right up and sit there. And I have found great blessings from just sitting, which is what is actually, you're sitting at the base of the cross. When you sit right there where this is, let's go to whatever picture is next. Just more pictures of these rocks. So this is the actual place insofar as we can see it. So now let's look at some artistic depictions of this. This is again Fra Angelico. with the women and saints that came after Christ, Christ in the middle, and the two criminals on either side of him. This painting is actually on the wall of the monastery in Florence. Fra Angelico put his paintings all through the cells of his brothers. So his brother monks would live in a cell that was decorated with one of these paintings. Now it's a museum, and you walk from monastic cell one to the other. So let's see the next. Here's a further rendition of what that crucifixion was like. And you see one of the Marys has fainted at the sight of what's happening. And the crowds are watching, jeering, worshiping, weeping, feeling everything that a human could feel at such a moment. Again, let's go to the next. This is Heinrich Hoffmann, who painted the picture of Jesus that many of the Ananda altars have, that Master said looks more like Jesus than most of the paintings. These were his drawings with the women, the soldier, and Christ. We can go on to the next. Fra Angelico's picture of the vinegar wine-soaked sponge that was offered to Jesus when Jesus said, "I thirst." And they rushed to give him the sponge to suck, to draw it. He drank, and then he said, "It is finished. I commend my spirit into God." So this was the last moment of his life. One more here. This is a Spanish artist named Murillo. It's so amazing because the picture is, the situation is intensely awful, but still there's the power of the divine coming through it when the artist is good. And now let's look at this last picture, which is Fra Angelico. It's a close-up of a painting of Jesus that he did of Jesus on the cross. And that's the song that Swami wrote for the crucifixion of Jesus is "You Remain Our Friend." And it's a very interesting way for him to talk about it. He talks about the great love that brought Jesus to this reality and the power of it to transform it if we will receive him. So this will be, we're a few minutes early, but we'll just listen to this song, and then this will be the end of the evening for us.
When we need you, you descend, seeking grieving hearts to mend. By hate unaffected, you remain our friend. On a cross rejected, doomed to meet a shameful end, still with love perfected, you remain our friend.